Welcome to Better Health Guy Blogcasts, empowering your better health. And now, here's Scott, your Better Health Guy. The content of this show is for informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness or medical condition. Nothing in today's discussion is meant to serve as medical advice or as information to facilitate self-treatment. As always, please discuss any potential health-related decisions with your own personal medical authority.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 48 of the Better Health Guy blogcast series. Today's guest is Andrea Fabry, and the topic of the show is your house making you sick? Andrea Fabry is a former journalist, a radio host, and the mother of 9 children. Her road to awareness began in 2008 when a serious toxic mold exposure compromised her entire family's health. She is the founder and president of momsaware.org. MomsAware's mission is to provide practical assistance to families and individuals displaced by toxic mold and to raise public awareness of the negative impact of toxic mold, chemicals, pesticides, and other environmental hazards on human health. Andrea is certified in the field of building biology and is passionate about the overuse of chemicals, the disregard for indoor environmental issues, and the proliferation of electromagnetic radiation. Her story is available on her blog, It Takes Time. She currently resides in Vail, Arizona with her husband, Chris, and 4 of their children. She authored the book, Is Your House Making You Sick? A Beginner's Guide to Toxic Mold, which is available on Amazon.com. And now, my interview with Andrea Fabry. So having been impacted myself by mold illness on 2 separate occasions, this is a topic that I feel really passionate about. I think it's so incredibly important for people to be aware of and to really explore it when they have an unexplained chronic illness. There are still far too little awareness around the impact of water-damaged buildings on health. And so I certainly enjoy the opportunity to both learn more about the topic, but also to share it with people that are listening. So thank you for being here, Andrea. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, I appreciate your interest in the topic, Scott. I really do.
Absolutely. So tell us a little about your family story, your struggle with chronic health challenges. What were some of the symptoms that you dealt with? And then how did you ultimately discover what it was that was making everyone sick?
Well, in the year 2000, we made a big move from an 1,800 square foot home. We were a family of 10 at the time. So we had 8 kids to a 5,500 square foot home. We went out west from Chicago, very excited. Could not find a house that seemed to fit us. And we bid on one. We didn't get it. At those days, you got 2 bidders at the same time. And we settled on a house that certainly was large enough. But the first time I walked through it, I knew nothing about really health or environment. I just had taken life for granted. 8 kids that were somewhat healthy. We were living life very conventionally. I walked through the house and I said, it's dark. I don't ever want to go back there. We couldn't find a house that met our needs. Our other house had sold. We needed to find something. And the realtor and my husband said, but think of the potential. Think of the potential. And I pushed down what was my gut feeling about the home without any knowledge. And that was my first lesson. And it's always my first lesson as you walk through a home or as you're sort of walking these health roads is to listen to your gut. And I didn't. And it took 7 years to understand exactly what happened in that home. Because as soon as we moved in, we spent more time in the doctor's office than I had ever spent. And we'd been parents for 15 years. Our oldest was 15 at the time. And we are sick all the time. Never gave it a thought, except that we went from Chicago to Colorado. Maybe it's the elevation change. That's as much as I thought. I was so busy trying to care for 8 sick kids. And in that first year, our birds died. Our dog got diabetes, went blind. A daughter developed a seizure disorder. Another 2-year-old got a blocked ileus, which is very rare in a 2-year-old. These are emergency room type issues. And honestly, I just thought, luck of the draw, that's too bad. Wow, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. 7 years later, in the year 2007, we discovered a small patch on a rug of water damage. I had seen it 7 years prior and dismissed it. This time, for some reason, was right before Mother's Day. I decided to do something about it, and I lifted it up, and there was all this black under there. And again, knowing nothing, we called a remediator, the cheapest one we could find, who totally dismissed the whole mold thing and said, you don't need big, listen, I know what I'm doing. It's no big deal. We'll take care of it. And he proceeded to uncover all of that mold, dug into walls, blew fans on the mold. No proper protocol. Didn't think a thing about that. Okay, it's gonna get back to normal. 6 weeks later, after that mold remediation, and then we patched it up and we repainted it, but it was an extensive black mold area that I just had to have completely gone into our air vents and the circulation of the air. And so, but without knowledge, you don't know. And most people are saying, no big deal. Good job. You got it fixed. Great. 6 weeks later, our son develops type 1 diabetes. No family history. We're in the ER again. 6 weeks after that, my 11-year-old is struggling with vertigo and ear ringing, can't go to school. 6 weeks after that, I pull another child out of school. And by December, this was May, by December, all my kids were out of school. And we were only at the emergency room and doctor's offices. In that year, after that botched remediation, we saw 60 specialists.
And this is when? So this is around 2008?
2007.
Okay.
2008. Yes, into 2008. Full year, 60 specialists, surgeries. My one son, who was 11 at the time, had 6 surgeries that were misdiagnosed and did him more harm. It is hard to walk through this every time because it is so painful, because hindsight is, you can see it so clearly, but when you're in it, you can't. And you're just holding on for, this is just the luck of the draw. What a bad year for us. Did not associate that with the mold at all. And finally found some more alternative medicines that seemed, medical treatments that seemed to help in the spring of that year, after 60 conventional doctors basically said, you're crazy here. Your child needs a counselor. And they weren't interested in what's going on with the other. By then we had 9 children. They weren't interested in any of the different symptoms that were displayed throughout the family, including my husband and myself. And some of those symptoms, since you asked, were the vertigo, the ear ringing, the digestive problems, the food sensitivities, the allergies, the autoimmune disease, the liver problems, the numbness, the joint pain. The biggest issue for me was memory loss. And at the time I was approaching 50, so it was easy to say, but we're talking, I can't remember from 8 in the morning when I drop my child off and say, for the one who was still trying to go to school, I say, I'll be back at 2. And at 2 o'clock, I'm nowhere to be found. She's like, you completely forgot, Mom. And I'm like, that was so new for me. So all of those symptoms, we started to find some alternative treatments, and we're going to get better. Well, in 2008, almost to the day, right before Mother's Day, we find another spot of mold 4 floors up. This 5,500 square foot home had 5 levels. And our son said, what's that on the ceiling? Oh, that's more water damage. Oh, now this is very hard to admit. We called the same mold remediator, who came in, opened it up, and blew fans on it. Thankfully, I had another daughter working at a coffee shop, where she had a mold guy who just came in for coffee, started talking. Oh, yeah. And he goes, this is pretty serious. So she came home and she said, he thinks this is serious, and it sounds to him like something's not right about the way it's being dealt with. I called him. He came through it, and he said, this is a crime, what's happening. You don't blow fans on this. That's when our journey truly began. And
so prior to that, the second person coming in and kind of giving you more information about it, it wasn't really clear yet that the mold was the cause of, or one of the main causes of, your family's health challenges.
Not at all.
Yeah. And it's kind of, I mean, it's not funny, but my story was similar years ago living in an apartment. I knew there was mold. I had seen it. There was pipes that had broken. There was an air conditioning that had flooded a closet. There was all kinds of things. And yet no one had really, back then, no one was really talking about the significance of mold and health. And so it took me time to put it together as well. And now we both know that it probably was one of the most significant things in our health journeys.
Absolutely, it was. And I had to fight very hard not to go down the road of blame. And I still can start to go down that road because of what happened to my children as a parent, to see them suffer long-term implications, some of them permanent, which, as you know, and we'll get to, is okay now. But it is very, very hard not to be hard on yourself when it's so clear later. And I have so much empathy for those who are just now beginning this journey, who it's like blinders being lifted and it becomes, no wonder. And that it took a lot for me to get there. And I'll tell you, the turning point for me was before the second mold, and it was in February. So remember, we found it in May, we had it remediated in June, and July we started to get sick, very sick. Now we were all sick before then. We're talking critical illness. In February of that year, I had friends come in to help me with housework. I couldn't function. I was always at the hospital with surgeries and ERs. And she was sweeping my kitchen floor, and she simply asked me a question. Do you think it's the house? And honestly, that is what changed it. She was the first person to suggest this. And she didn't tell me, she asked me a question. So this is why I titled my book, Is Your House Making You Sick? I don't know. She didn't know. It's a good question to ask for everyone. And I attribute it to her because it was in the back of my mind. So that when we found it the second time, called the bad remediator, I quickly responded when my daughter said, this guy sounds like he knows something. I called him. I took action. I listened to him. And then it was part 2 of the journey, from lack of knowledge to knowledge. And I hoped that knowledge would bring us all back to normal. And as I'm sure we'll talk about it, it didn't.
And I can't imagine how stressful that was for you with both yourself, your husband, and 9 children. I mean, I know what it was like myself going through it, just trying to get myself well, but to have 11 people that you're trying to manage all. I mean, I can't even imagine how you project manage that kind of, appointments and medications. And it just sounds overwhelming to
it
me.
was. And I can tell you that one time my husband was out of town, and of course he's just trying to keep going, trying to work and provide. And one time he was out of town, and I gave our son, our dog's insulin. I mean, it's dangerous. Do you know what I mean? I mixed them up. So yes, how did I don't know. It is very, very painful to even go back there, except that you do. It's like any survival. It's amazing what the human spirit can endure.
So in your book, I did see some reference to Lyme disease as something. It was either in the book or on the blog as something that you considered as well. And so did it turn out that Lyme was a piece of the puzzle for anyone in your family, or was it not part of the puzzle at all?
Our one daughter did not respond to any sort of treatment, and she was in her 20s at the time. And we decided to go down the road of Lyme because I didn't know much about that. I was just learning about mold. I was learning about autoimmune. I'm learning about inflammation. I'm learning about C4As. It's just, but we did get her tested for mold. It came back inconclusive. So some was yes, and this needed more testing. And at that point, that was the beginning of accepting a certain mystery to all of this. And I decided, you know what? We are all microbial messes is what we are. What this is, which microbes, I'm going to have to let go of, because to say inconclusive would have meant, and at that point, we had done lab testing for 10 of us. Then to start going down this road, I couldn't do it. And I pulled back and accepted that probably she has. I can't even but I learned, thanks to a lot of counsel from the toxicologist who was the leader in that field at the time, Dr. Jack Thrasher, who was since lost. But he was very helpful in understanding that microbes are microbes. They do us harm and they stay in the body. And I just sort of accepted that I may never know who has what to what extent. I just sort of accepted that, yeah, we're so microbially off and I don't know what's going to get us to turn the corner, but that part I just sort of left alone.
So it sounds like you kind of approached it with the theory of the bucket that's overflowing, and it doesn't matter so much what's in the bucket, but if we can reduce those things that are stressing the system enough, we get below that line of what creates symptoms and what creates illness, essentially.
Exactly. And so much of this journey is pulling back to see the bigger picture of sort of, okay, maybe, I guess I say again, accepting mystery. In Western culture and medicine, we want to know everything. We want to get it down to the detail. And you get this myopic view of things and you're focused on what is it? Pulling back, and as we'll talk later, is more of the acupuncture, herbal route, more of the whole picture. We may never know that I was very, very drawn to simply because I got so overwhelmed trying to figure it out. I couldn't do it.
And I think one of the beautiful things about the body is we don't have to solve every problem. We just need to take enough of the burden off that it can do what it was intended to do. So that I think is empowering. We don't have to solve, to your point, you don't have to solve every microbe and every possible stressor, but you got to get enough of them off so the body can start doing what it was created to do. You mentioned C4A. So how did Richie Shoemaker's work play into your family's journey? Did you use his protocol at all? And kind of what approach did you find helpful for dealing with the mold illness?
We found a physician specializing in mold illness who used the Shoemaker protocol originally. In when we moved out of the house, left everything, started over, I felt it hit rock bottom in so many ways. We didn't recover like I just hoped. So we found a mold physician who offered that. We went with him, even though it was out of network with our insurance. We got all the labs done. We started on cholestyramine. We started on all of the nutrient supplements. It was the protocol, his version, this doctor's version. And we did that for 3 months. And some of our kids really couldn't tolerate the cholestyramine. And I also started to see, I'm not sure I can keep up with this level, with this many people. By then, we had moved to Arizona to sort of like take a break and gather our thoughts and see what getting better would be like, since it became clear we weren't just going to get better by leaving the house. That was a big shock. That took a while for me to accept. Once I accepted it, it's like, well, I'll embrace it then. Okay, then I'll embrace it. Maybe if we're outdoors more, we're near someone who can validate this and knows to sort of watch over us, then we'll just sort of dive in with that protocol. 3 months into it, some weren't tolerating. I was overwhelmed. And I began to explore again the alternatives to this. And we started doing energy medicine with the on-demand. We started doing acupuncture. We sort of found some other ways. And as it's been, so much of the time is just, well, what is the next step? And for me, as the mom, as sort of the leader in this, with some of my kids not handling that cholestyramine well, plus it's a drug, and there's no, again, the healing path, the recovery route looks different for everybody. For me, I didn't want to keep them long-term. My youngest was 7. I didn't want to keep them long-term on something like this. And what is long-term? So I will say, I don't think it did us any harm, and in some ways did help us. It probably got us started on the detoxing process. Then we turned it to the other alternatives, and I just left it behind. I left it. Either we were going to do it. That's me, though. Either I do it, or I can't do too much at once. I can't follow too many protocols at once. I let it go. I let that protocol go for us and went forward because I felt like, well, we're getting treatment here. I don't know. Again, it's back to accepting maybe I'm doing it all right. Maybe I'm not doing it all right. okay. And I kept coming back to, are you trying? I'm like, I am trying. Okay. Because there's so much information and conflicting information and opinions and healing stories and I know, this is your life. This is what you deal with. And because you see it from so many different angles, I was becoming paralyzed in that, especially as a mother, when the only thing I want to do is the best for them. So it was constantly, are you doing everything you can? I finally came to accept that probably not. And is that okay? Yeah, I'm probably not doing everything I can. Do I love them? Am I trying? Am I caring? Yes. Do I have them? Somebody watching over them? Yes, I do. We just changed we changed the treatment routes is what we did along the way.
So let's touch on a few of the kind of topics that you bring out in the book. And I think the book is fantastic. I've gone through it in preparing for this, and I'd actually seen it even prior to preparing for the discussion today. And I think people that are dealing with mold, it's a fantastic resource to kind of see what worked for you and what were some of the things that you explored. But what are some of the factors that lead to growth or overgrowth of mold in an indoor environment? And what are some of the things people can do to minimize the risk of creating an environment that may be unhealthy for them?
First of all, it's important to understand, and I come at this from the field of building biology. I realized that I wanted to be certified in something. I felt a huge kindredness with the field of building biology that originated in Germany and came to this country. It hasn't spread like wildfire the way I think it should, but it will in time as people become more aware. But basically, the premise is your environment is your third skin. It lives, it breathes, it's hugely important. And so when we even see our homes that way, that's gonna change. Just opening that up. This is important when it comes to my well-being. So when we started building with drywall and we put plumbing indoors, we created the perfect storm, literally in some cases, because water and the right food, which is certainly cellulose and drywall, and it's cheap, it's easy, we can get our houses up so fast. It makes sense why we latched onto it as a culture, certainly financially. So much of what our decisions are about money rather than health. Then we created this, beside the chemicals, then we created the opportunity for any kind of leak to get into the drywall and produce these biocontaminants. And so the emphasis is more on the biocontaminants rather than just mold. And I remember Dr. Jack Thrasher, anytime I would interview him, I'd say, so what about toxic mold? He goes, no, stop. It's biocontaminants, it's endotoxins, it's gram-negative bacteria, it's a slew of toxicities that are produced when water intrudes in the home. So just that awareness will change your life. So even in our home today, we live in a home with drywall, a traditional home. But if there is any sort of leak, we are over the top. We had a leak under our sink. We removed the whole thing, the whole cabinet, because we don't want to take a chance. That's us. That's coming through from our experience. But that sort of vigilance, we're getting our roof worked on right now. There were just a couple tiles that were off. Yeah, no, go ahead, redo whatever you need to do. So being very proactive to avoid leaks in the first place. The levels of humidity in a home, it is ideal for 50 to 60%. Those living in humid climates have an issue with that. Basements were not a good idea to build underground where there's no sunlight. And so, but that doesn't mean you can't live in an imperfect home. That is not the point here. This is where I live. It is awareness, though. And if there is enough water intrusion and enough problems within the body of those in the family who struggle to detox or to handle this level of toxicity, there is a time to say, this home is doing us no favors. Someplace else without this history would be a better fit. And thus you begin a new journey. And when you buy a home with knowledge, it looks a lot different than just buying a home. Well, it's near the school I want. I like the layout. It's pretty. I like the yard. I like the neighborhood. No, is this home structurally safe? And of course, this is what the field of building biology offers.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's fantastic. So I agree that it goes far beyond mold. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of great ways to easily test for a lot of these other biocontaminants without getting an indoor environmental professional. And then even then, they don't necessarily test for all of those biocontaminants. So if we kind of look at the mold piece as one of the things that people more commonly focus on from a testing perspective, what do you think is a good way to test your environment for the mold? Do you like the ERMI? Do you like the mold plates? What tools do you feel helpful?
Again, there is no one perfect test, and sometimes the test will miss it. Any test is a snapshot. You must understand the limitations of even the best hygienists coming in and doing bulk samples and dust samples and air samples. It's a complex structure. Things hide. But as a first step, I do feel I've seen it time and time again that the ERMI, the ERMI, which tests for 36 of the most common toxic species that can be toxic in a home, is the way to go. I like it better than the HERTS-Me. The HERTS-Me is 5 of those, the most common. But again, if you're going to take this step and test your environment, sometimes it is just better to get more knowledge, more of a picture, because sometimes those 5 aren't as big as something else that shows something's going on here. But I'll tell you though, Scott, what I really rely on most is gut instinct. And I go back to my gut feeling about that house. And when we bought this house, and it took us 6 years to even come close to buying a home, I walked through this in 5 minutes and I said, this is good. I know it. My gut was so different than the other. So you never want to push that down, because so many times someone is sick, they're living in this house that has a history of mold, but the hygienist or the ERMI doesn't suggest that there's a problem. What do I do with that? I'm not saying, oh, you just go on that. You just don't push it down. You keep it as a factor. Do I feel like I'm in a safe place? How is the ventilation? How is the light access? What's going on with the air? And, am I close to a farm where there's lots of chemicals? I mean, there's so many things that you don't have to know everything about, but your gut sometimes will say, something's not right here.
So with the ERMI, which I actually like as well, and I think that's one of the best tools we have available, I think one of the challenges sometimes is the collection mechanism. It's self-collection. Everybody samples slightly different areas, and that can have an effect on the results. So do you have a preference for the vacuum canister versus the Swiffer cloth style of collection?
I do. I absolutely prefer the cloth, because and I don't necessarily prefer carpet. And I go back to Dr. Thrasher on this. He was very big on taking settled dust in a corner. Now you vacuumed it up, and sure, the dust comes back pretty quickly. So a lot can be told. I'm not saying one is, not good, but I do feel that cloth method is superior. He definitely validated that for me and explained why. But I do encourage people to not get caught up so much of the method, but where you're getting the dust. Refrigerator coils, you want the history. You want what's been sitting there for a long time, because if it's there, it's in your home. It may not show up with one speck of dust, one patch of dust that you take. So I like taking it from a variety of places and sort of seeing what's in the home. I don't necessarily need to know where that is. Sometimes people just want to know what's in that bedroom. Okay, find a closet on a shelf in a corner that's dusty and get that dust.
Perfect. You mentioned in the book the real-time labs mycotoxin testing as well. So I'm interested in your thoughts on mycotoxin testing in general. Do you do that more for testing the environment, or do you find that the urinary mycotoxin testing is also useful in looking at whether or not someone's been exposed to mold toxins?
Sometimes our testing can create more questions than answers. And I think that's important to know when you're entering into any testing. And honestly, we did the urine mycotoxin testing. It actually, at that time, we tested, believe it or not, we had astronomical levels of Stachybotrys in our home. And that's, again, why Dr. Thrasher at the time took such interest in our case, is he's never seen those kinds of levels. It was because the fans were blown on, the the slime, so it just flew in. We tested negative for trichothecenes, which is the mycotoxin from Stachybotrys. One thing I'd look back and go, probably would have been better to wait until we had been detoxing some, but it created a level of doubt in my mind that we did the right thing to leave. It created a lot of stress. I'm not saying they're not good tests. Later on, we did some other testing of some of the other molds and ochratoxins and so on, aflatoxins, and we tested high on those. And I found that validating, okay. But in the end, I'm 9 years out, Scott. In the end, I knew we were sick from this. Do I really need to know which is high and which is low?
Right.
I never retested. I have no idea where we would fall. I haven't retested anything in 9 years. I left that behind and accepted, okay, even if we do, what am I going to do differently? Nothing. I know what I know when I know we got sick in that house.
Yeah.
That was enough. Had I trusted that, did I really need any sort of validation to say, oh, yeah. But I was in that mindset of, I just want to know, I want to know, I want to know everything there is to know so that I can feel good about our decision. Because it's a very radical thing to look at your environment and say, my house almost killed us. What? That's not possible. So you're looking for any sort of validation.
Right.
And in some ways that helped.
I personally did find the real-time labs testing helpful, but I know it is controversial. There's a lot of discussions on both sides of whether or not it's a useful approach. I'm excited to see that Great Plains Lab just came out with a new mycotox panel, and they're really well known in the functional medicine realm. So at least people are continuing to research and explore and trying to find new and better tools, because I think people who realize that mold is affecting their health currently, it's just the tip of the iceberg of the reality of all the people that are probably being affected by these things.
Absolutely. And the lab test, depending on where someone is in their journey, can be the awakening. That can do it. Oh, wow. Okay. So I don't dismiss any of it. You just have to know your own journey and where you want to put your energy and money and all of those decisions. That's why there is no one path here. I've seen it used so well. I saw an a mold allergy test help parents connect this home with all of the sickness in their house. It was just that one test. Had they not had that, I don't think they would have made the connection.
Right.
So, is that the perfect test? I don't know. It helped.
Right. So when someone sees mold that's visible in an environment, I hear people saying things like, oh, I've just cleaned it with bleach and it went away. And the reality is, my understanding is it doesn't necessarily go away when you use bleach. So what are some good options if people notice these areas, maybe in a bathroom or in a shower? What are some options for potentially cleaning it, or is that even a good idea at all?
It absolutely is. And it just is always important to ask when you see any mold. I don't care how big, how small. Is there anything behind that? Is this just something that's telling me something more about what's going on? That's the first question to ask. And if I know what I know about my home, and I've had patches of, black show up in my shower. So I'm not alarmed by that. So I like pumice stones are very good. White vinegar, tea tree oil, baking soda. I have a whole post on my blog on surface mold solutions, because you're right, bleach simply discolors the mold. It actually doesn't kill it. And then because it's wet and there's water, it can get behind and actually, escalate the problem. Bleach is an automatic no. It does kill bacteria and does kill viruses. It does kill those things. But frankly, there are natural things that will do the same thing. I much prefer staying away from something that strong for my family, especially in an indoor environment. If I had to use bleach, I might use it outside because it kills the bacteria. I'm not negating the fact that it does work in some cases, but I would never use it to correct a mold problem, even a surface mold, especially in a bathroom. You're cleaning it out of a shower. The ventilation is not good for you. Right. So the other thing to ask about if there's surface mold in a bathroom or a shower is, how's the ventilation in that room? The ventilation is as key as anything when it comes to our homes. Absolutely. And that's one of the problems with basements. Sometimes the ventilation is so bad, stagnant air will breed microbial problems. It's the same way of seeing a stagnant pond versus running water, which looks cleaner. The stagnant pond you can tell has just full of microbes.
Yeah, and the humidity obviously in the bathrooms is going to be more significant. And so I'm seeing more and more where people actually have fans that are automatically on or off based on the humidity level in the room. I think that's at least a better idea than just, not having it.
Right, absolutely. You do want working ventilation. Your fan is important. It's a good investment. If yours isn't working well, invest in a new one. Get it done.
There are companies that have come out with different types of probiotic solutions, essentially, that they say can either crowd out molds, can maybe, some of them say they'll actually use the molds as their feeding source or their food source. Have any of those been helpful in your experience?
I got, for a period of time, I really worked quite a bit with efficient microorganisms, EMs, and one of the companies is Organics. And I started making my own and using it for cleaning, and I don't dismiss any of that. What I don't want to get lost in is living and accepting a mold problem in a home and saying, well, this is going to solve it, so I don't need to worry. You want to keep it always open. I don't want to just try and get rid of this problem and lose sight of maybe I've got something bigger going on that no probiotic solution. See, in the end, some of these situations in homes really are not fixable, and mold remediation can help. It can always improve it, but you don't lose that toxicity history by one certain product or one certain treatment. As long as you don't lose sight of that, I think you're fine to try different things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when someone's looking for an inspector or a remediator to come in, what are some of the things that you would look for in kind of interviewing that person to make sure that they are knowledgeable enough for someone who has a chronic inflammatory response syndrome? I've seen time and time again, people have someone come in, they said, oh yeah, they came in, they did some air samples, they found nothing, so I know my home is fine, only to find out when they bring someone in that really knows how to test that they have a totally different perspective. So what would you suggest in terms of finding a knowledgeable inspector?
Okay, or remediator, because
Sure.
Those are two different positions. Yep. So inspector, my first suggestion is to know that you're the expert here. You can call in someone to help, but this is your home, it's your health. Inspectors are not really trained in our health and certainly understanding genetic predisposition. I mean, this is not what they're trained to do. They're trained to come in and find a problem, and you'll find a whole range of expertise. And it's true, some are better than others, but it's really important to start with, you know what? I know I can trust my gut, and I'm going to trust my gut as to whether this person knows what they're talking about. Because you will have a sort of sense about things. If you are having health problems and you have a history of water damage, rest assured there is a connection. So as someone comes in to look and they say, no, you're fine. Do you want to push that down and say, okay, I'm going to believe them? So just go at this process with confidence. And so I have on my blog a post called 8 Questions to Ask a Mold Remediation Company. And that comes with, first of all, do you believe mold is a health problem? Because remember, our mold remediator said no. And that sounds very basic, but you want someone who says, oh, yes. No, you don't want someone who says, well, I mean, a little allergy problem. I've seen some sniffles from mold. No. You don't want to pay anyone to look at your home or deal with your home who says, it's not a big deal. Really? I did, and we lost. Far better to keep looking for that person. So assuming they say, oh, absolutely, it's an issue. You are so smart to be on this. Yes. So, well, what kind of protocol do you use? When it comes to the inspection, you could just take what they say and then decide for yourself? Do they seem to really look hard at the crawl space? Crawl spaces are magnets for this type of thing. Do they understand building construction enough to know that it hides in the air ducts and that the air circulation, all of it is affected? It's all one thing. Do they really check the roof? Do they minimize all that? Or are they really taking it seriously? Then you have to decide, how are they testing it? They will typically, now I'm switching from remediation to inspector, but the inspector will typically do air testing, and that's very limited. I have seen air sampling tell a lot though. So again, it depends on your situation. Just know that, okay, air sampling is just one snapshot. You have to decide, is this where I want to put my money? This is why I recommend the ERMI. It doesn't require anybody except you to swipe the dust and see what you got. And I'm not playing down. Now, you can't use an ERMI if there's a legal problem. It doesn't hold up in court, so you need a hygienist to come in and do something. But you could encourage a dust sample. Bulk samples, which is taking dust directly from something, will help. It's good. But as far as the mold remediation company, you don't want anyone remediating your home unless they understand that it needs to be contained. So if they're not using the word containment, no. And you don't want them to say, we will fix this. It'll be totally fine. You decide that. You decide how localized is the problem, how deep is the problem, how bad is our health. There's so many things to ask and know before you just don't want to put your health in the hands of someone else who has no health training. You've got to stay strong with, this is what I'm deciding. Now, see if you go along with me. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So in all of the people that you've spoken with, how frequently would you say that remediation is ultimately successful versus the person needs to find an entirely new environment?
Well, of course, the people I deal with, and if you ever feel isolated or alone with mold problem, I can just say after 9 years, there are a lot of people suffering. But when people get to me, because it's scary to see someone who left their home and had to leave everything, which I certainly would never tell anyone to do. I always encourage, what is your gut feeling about this? Let's look at here's what we know. Now, what do you think? Because typically someone will know. Your question, though, is how many times can mold remediation be successful? I'm seeing the catastrophic situations. In the catastrophic, sometimes, even if it's possible that you could make it better, sometimes it's just best to start over without this history. So when we were house hunting, and if, of course, there was my gut feeling, but we looked for a history of mold remediation. If someone said, oh, it was remediated, it's fine, that was no. That wasn't a candidate.
That would be no for me as well.
Yeah, no. So do you want to live in a home with a history of mold remediation? That's a decision. But sometimes they're small. I remember we lived in a rental home 9 months out, and we got a small patch of mold. Now, we were renting. The landlord was not going to deal with it the way we wanted, so we paid to have it done right. And we remediated it successfully and lived there 4 more years. So there is a time and place for mold remediation with knowledge.
So if someone finds out that they have mold in their environment, there's really no question, but they can't afford remediation, they can't move, they're stuck there for some period of time. Are there things that they can do to minimize the health impacts of being in that environment, or any ways to either remediate or mitigate it in some way that can maybe fit within their budget for a short period of time?
I have known people who just completely contained one bathroom and didn't use it and put plastic on it because this was temporary housing. We're not going to invest here. We're going to be moving on. And these were people who had left a mold home already. So they knew it was just this one. So again, knowledge is your power here. So there are times when, if this is what we have to live with, there are things to do. You just don't use it. This area of the home, stay out of the basement if possible. Move your laundry upstairs if you need to. I still recommend always thinking outside the box. Don't box yourself in with the words, I can't. don't box yourself in. Just say, at this point, it's not looking like we can move, but I'm going to stay open here. Because I've talked with people who decided to camp outside of their home so that they can, it's pretty cheap. They came in to do what they had to do, but they were sleeping in fresh air. And so, again, if you're sick enough, thinking outside the box and taking radical approaches may seem crazy to other people, but where there's a will, there's a way. I would say there's, if you have to stay, is there a way to make it better? Absolutely. And you're asking, what are some of those things? It's good ventilation, possibly shutting down one part of the house, living in a small spot, living outside, diffusing essential oil, I know can be good. It doesn't cure the problem though. Mm-hmm. You don't want to take these sort of shortcuts and think, okay, this is the cure. No, these are ways to get by until you figure out what your next step is.
So are there particular air filters potentially that you have found helpful that you see really make a clinical difference in someone's symptom presentation?
I since we left everything and started over, soon after we purchased an air filter because I was very afraid of chemicals. I was afraid of everything at that point. So we did get the Austin HealthMate. This has been 8 years. And I find that now I don't even think about using an air filter because if your house is clean and you have good ventilation and you're knowledgeable about your health, you don't have to worry. I'm just not. I know that not everyone's in that place.
Right.
So I am not the expert on air purification and those purifiers. I think they help. They certainly can't hurt. What can hurt is if you're using one in a mold contaminated environment and you bring it with you.
Yeah.
Because that has so much of that history in the air filter and change air purification system or whatever it is. You can change the filter, but I wouldn't bank on that. If I'm going to go to the trouble of leaving a home and changing environments and going to a home without history of mold, I'm not going to bring my air purifier.
So I have my thoughts on these next two, but I'm interested in your thoughts on ozone and fogging solutions to address mold in a living environment.
Again, I am cautious about the word solution, and we like those words because we like to feel resolved, and I've got my solution. Can these things make a situation better? For ozone, I went with the advice of Dr. Jack Thrasher, who again is a toxicologist. He's broader in his knowledge. And it's really hard for me to say the late Dr. Thrasher. I still feel like he's here. We worked closely for a lot of years. Mm-hmm. But I asked him about that early on, and he said ozone can be very, very difficult for people and is actually potentially toxic to the lungs in the long term. So ozone is good up high and not so good down low, as I understand it. Even the EPA says that, and not necessarily that you can believe everything the government tells us, but that's pretty clear. So some people have felt really good about the ozone treatment. So I don't negate it. And the same with the fogging. I'm just always cautious with this seen as this is the solution. This is going to clean everything. I just would look at that skeptically. There may be a time where I have had people tell me the fogging helped. I felt better after the fogging. So I would never dismiss that. Mm-hmm. But they're operating on a very long trajectory. Health is a long journey. And if along the way you find something helps and sort of lightens the load, great.
Perfect. So what are your thoughts on some of the things that you can salvage and take with you from a moldy environment to a new, hopefully not moldy environment and not risk cross-contamination?
This is where you can get caught the most in the small story and sort of almost get paralyzed. For us, when I heard treat this like a fire, that resonated with me. To me, that was easier than going item by item. We had 5 levels. We had 11 people. We had a lot of history of memorabilia. We had bought brand new appliances. Had I gotten bogged down with all that, I don't know where I'd be today. That being said, I would probably say we could have cleaned some of the stainless steel things, anything that didn't have a fan. I wouldn't bring appliances. I wouldn't bring even our piano. I wouldn't bring computers. I wouldn't bring a lot of books. Porous items hold on to this. Clothing holds on to it. I tried to save a pair of jeans after the first remediation when I didn't know anything at a dry cleaner's, and she said, "You don't smell this mold? I will not clean this." I didn't smell it. I ended up taking all of our clothes at that point to the dumpster, and he said, "Oh, that just smells like mold." I couldn't smell it. Clothing will hold on to it. And so when you are making this transition, I always say, store it. If you can't, if leaving it as a fire is not an option, you can't lose to pay for a few months of storage. When you start out in your new environment, start minimal. Get new bedding and clothing. Those two things are vital. But you'll hear all sorts of opinions on this. And I'm saying, I'm not saying that's not true. I'm saying you can't lose to be cautious. Go to Walmart and get two sets of clothes for everybody and just live sort of minimally for a while and store things. See how you feel. Oftentimes when we bring things in one at a time, we know. Maybe you're outside and you're wiping down that stainless steel pan that you really wanted to bring in. You bring it in and everything's fine. But cross-contamination was my biggest fear, and we treated it as a fire. I can't imagine if I would have brought a few things and continued to see symptoms, because we did. For your sanity's sake alone, order on caution. Don't get caught up, well, we didn't have Stachybotrys, so that's not as sticky, but this person says this. This is about you and what's best for you in the long run. It's been 9 years. I could care less about any of that. Now, we did box up our scrapbooks. This is treating it like a fire, isn't it? What do you go for? You go for the people and you go for your pictures. And 6 years out, I paged through a scrapbook. I'm like, this cannot be a problem after 6 years. I'm feeling better, and I'm not going to be afraid of this. So I paged through it because I thought, well, I knew I didn't want to bring them in just for caution's sake. I wanted to go to the office store and get them scanned. So I thought, well, I'll pick some pages out. I went into the office store and I noticed as I was driving away, my lungs started to just tighten in a way that I had not experienced in 6 years. And I'm like, okay, this could be psychological. I accept that. So I'm like, okay, maybe it's psychological. I'll give myself that. I'm really glad we didn't bring in the scrapbooks. That's what I thought. Even if this is psychological. Within hours, I got a rash on my hand that I had not seen since the house. That I didn't make up. And all I'm saying by that is it's real. The problem with the scrapbooks is they were in a bin in plastic. There was no room to breathe. They were actually even more inflammatory because of the way they were stored. And that's neither here nor there. In the long run, I'm really glad we were cautious, and it's real. You don't want to listen to the main culture which says that's ridiculous. This stuff is hidden. That's why I love the biocontaminant nature of damp indoor spaces. Microbially, there's a lot going on we don't know. And we see it in our health. Our health is not good as a nation. So the people who are saying, oh, that's nothing, maybe on 4 medications and living in something they have no idea what. And I'm not downing medication or anything, but sometimes we just suppress it. We don't want to think about it. We want to just sort of keep the blinders on.
I think the recommendation to really be minimalistic in terms of what you bring to the new environment makes a lot of sense, because it's just kind of removing a whole nother variable long enough for you to see that you start feeling better in that environment. And then you can kind of test the waters a little bit after some period of time. So I think that's a great recommendation. Let's talk a little bit about some of the treatment things that you potentially found helpful. So once you knew that mold and biocontaminants were affecting your family, looking back, what were some of the most effective things that helped your family?
Well, the first thing we were advised from a psychologist, because we had a lot of brain problems. And you see it in kids who are 10 years old. And I'm glad as a mom, I had been a parent for so long. I knew this is not normal. The type of reactions, the type of compulsions, the type of fears, deep suicidal thoughts in 10-year-olds, something's not normal. So in our area of Arizona, there's a psychologist named Dr. Robert Crago, who's very well versed in mold exposure and toxicity in general, its impact on the brain. Well, how am I going to get 11 people treated? So I went to him, though, initially in that first year and said, 9 kids were all affected. He said, well, if I can give you the biggest bang for your buck, it would be to teach you to breathe. I dismissed that because it didn't feel like it would work. And I was on the path to fixing this, getting us all better, detoxing, breathing. I wish I would have taken that to heart sooner. I wasn't in the place to hear it, but I would put that at the top of the list for retraining the brain, which is now in fight or flight trauma mode, anxiety. It's constantly threatened, especially when you leave an environment and then you're out in a world with all these toxic chemicals. We had multiple chemical sensitivity. We were getting nosebleeds with any exposure near a laundry aisle. The world was very threatening to me as a mom, and we became terrified. We isolated a lot, and I don't regret that. It was sort of a healing, bonding time. I don't look back and go, well, nothing helped. Everything helped. The isolating, taking a break from the world did us good. I wish I would have understood the power of learning to breathe deeply. It's detoxifying. The research on this is fantastic to validate this. It's one of the first things I would do. I didn't really embrace that until 6, 7, 8 years later, and I wish I had done that sooner. But the other top treatment, I would say, was changing our diet radically. We were a fast food, McDonald's, pizza takeout family, the whole, that's what we were. Very busy, on the run, healthy family, fast food all the way. I just really didn't cook from scratch. That just wasn't me. We used conventional detergents, anything that was cheap. That you should have seen our pantry the day we left our home. It's just sad, but true. So realizing once we got out, this isn't just going to go away. We're not going to magically get better. Everything's going to need to change. And then here, I know you know this, like not just our environment, not just some of these treatments, our whole lifestyle has to change. And I really found that challenging. And I wasn't afraid of it because I always wanted an excuse to eat healthier for the family. I took out sugar in my diet in my 20s and never went back. And I think that actually helped me survive what we went through. And I wasn't just, I'm going to have a little. I was just the person that realized none is better for me. And I realized the body can very well survive on it. Well, I was almost looking for a chance to get my kids on board. So I explained what sugar in the intestinal system and with some of our microbes and the fungus there and candida and all this. I got a big poster out. I said, so we're going to try 30 days of no sugar. We actually went on the gut and psychology syndrome diet, but there's all sorts of diets. But again, I was really interested in the brain relation to the gut. So we tried it for 30 days and then we were doing so well. We did 60, we did 90. We did it for a year or two.
Wow.
And I've never gone back. I just eat very clean. Sugar to me is just something we don't need. I even have very little fruit, but I would rank that high. I would rank breathing and food. And when you think about it, when we come out of the womb, those are the two things that matter. Breathing and the womb. It's very simple. I think we make our health more complex than it needs to be, perhaps. Some of the basics can do so much. And I put that, and the diet is so hard, especially when you have a fungal problem. It's craving the sugar. That's what feeds it. It's the cellulose in our home. It's the sugar that feeds the fungus. So cutting that out is easier said than done. And I don't minimize that, but certainly just understanding that this could have a powerful impact. can do a lot to help motivate you. So I put those two at the top. And for us, acupuncture was really, really valuable. And I can't really, it's not one. And Scott, I told you this beforehand. My message is not, this is how you get better. My message is, there are all sorts of paths. And I wouldn't rank them or say, oh, it has to look this way. I was so anxiety ridden about doing it right. And I told you earlier, it's like, well, maybe I'm not doing it right. Okay. I know I'm trying really hard and I'm an over the top person. If you tell me to try something, I'll try it. Instead of, I'm not good at just sort of relaxing and into it. And I learned to relax in this whole process and sort of trust my gut. Acupuncture was hugely helpful. And I like it because it's treatment. From the right person who's really well trained, you are stimulating the immune system. So anything that nudges our immune system, I found helpful. And that to me was a great match because there weren't a lot of tests, a lot of office visits, a lot of trying to figure things out. His diagnosis for us was damp heat, which makes sense because we are a microbial mess and it's so damp in there. We're trying to dry out our systems. So it just connected with me.
I think acupuncture is fantastic once you find the right person. I had tried it many times over years, and for whatever reason, it just wasn't the right time for me. And maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I found an acupuncturist that's been phenomenal, and I continue to go every 3 weeks just as a good, not only good balancing for the meridians and the body overall, but oftentimes the insights that she can get from feeling your pulses and looking at your tongue and it's often very, very insightful. So I also find that helpful. Once you got out of your environment to a new safe environment, you started doing some of these things. How long did it take before you started seeing improvements in your family's symptoms such that you went, we're on the right path, even if there's more distance to travel?
Do you want to really know that honest answer?
Yeah.
2 years. 2 years. I just, until then, the only reason I kept going though is I guess from day one, I felt so validated that something did make us sick. And I just kept coming back to all I really need to do is not give up and know and promise my kids and my family I won't give up trying. But we didn't see a lot of reward. We didn't. And so but I know some people 6 weeks out, they're doing much better. That's our story. And it just didn't happen quickly for us.
So what were some of the things then once you got to the new environment? You've mentioned detoxifying, you've mentioned doing various binders and other things potentially other than cholestyramine. What tools are you using to detoxify your systems from the prior exposure?
What, at the time or now? At that time?
Just maybe the ones that you found most helpful either then or now.
Okay. I'm trying to, you're talking about 11 people. My husband just seemed to just continue to get better with the diet and being out. I would say slow, steady progress. Just his personality is, I'm not going to focus on this. He's providing. And I just felt like it went smoother for him. Genetically, I'm more complex and I know that. And we can talk about that. But that started to paralyze me. I felt doomed almost by this. It's genetically, I'm going to recover slower, and I had to put that outside my mind. But as far as detoxing, I found the charcoal and the bentonite clay and zeolite, sometimes sort of alternating those. They're natural. I felt that those were good. Fasting along with colon cleansing, that combination I found hugely beneficial for me. That may not be for everyone. I never thought I could fast like that and just do juicing. So then I started doing coffee enemas on a regular basis. Those helped me tremendously. I felt that anything I was giving a nudge to push my immune system in the right direction was going to help.
Yeah, coffee enemas for me in 21 years since I started getting sick from Lyme and mold illness is definitely in my top 3 list. I mean, there's just no question. I mean, it's not one of those things you'd want to go and talk about so much, but it's been so incredibly beneficial. Yeah. In your book, you talk about the role of antifungals. And this is also an area that's somewhat debated in terms of whether or not these environmental molds and organisms that we get exposed to have the potential for colonizing either the sinuses or the gut. And so I'm wondering, where do you kind of fall there? Do you think that if we're exposed to these aspergillus and penicillium and cladosporium and other organisms, do you think that those potentially can then colonize the body to some extent?
Oh, absolutely. Can those molds colonize? Absolutely. I saw it in my kids' nasal passages because our mold doctor said, he put a light up there. He said, they're colonized. And you could see it in the skin. You can see fungal colonies here. Absolutely. So the problem is you come out of your environment and you're colonized internally. Now, my acupuncturist didn't go at it that way. So there are two ways to see it. I'm a microbial mess and things are really sticking in there and they form groups. I mean, depends on how you see it, but absolutely, I saw evidence of colonization. Now, did that lead me to take antifungals? Are you asking about the drug therapy for that, or?
No, not necessarily. I was just curious because that is more of a question that people commonly talk about in the shoemaker realm. The idea of colonization isn't commonly explored or really considered. In Joe Brewer's work and others, there is more of that idea that, well, if you've been breathing these things in for a long period of time, just because you get out of your environment, that it's not just needing to detoxify, but that it could be that some of these organisms have also kind of come with you. And I was just interested on where you kind of fell on that.
I saw it, and you can take a black light on your skin and you could see colonies. I mean, to me, it makes sense. These microbes like to stick together, and that's how they grow, and they form groups. Right. And that it would go with you is part of the damp heat diagnosis. You know, it's like, oh, there's all sorts of bugs in those tropical climates near the equator. I mean, there's just like magnets to groups of organisms. It's just that we just don't necessarily know, everything about them.
One of the common questions that I get from people that have chronic inflammatory response syndrome or mold illness or biocontaminant illness, whatever term we want to give it, is whether or not they will ever be able to tolerate going into a building, a store, a restaurant. What's been your family's experience? Can you tolerate to a certain extent the outside world at this point?
Absolutely. And, this was about 3 to 4 years out. Again, we spent 2 years sort of hibernating. I don't regret that at all. I just know I wanted back in the world and I would do whatever it took. So there was just a certain, and we were told the MCS diagnosis, multiple chemical sensitivity diagnosis, is permanent. There's no way around that. I just started to read quite a bit about neuroplasticity. I just wasn't willing to accept that.
I would not have been willing to accept it either. So good for you.
So you know what? And you've got my kids who are following me as the example, and they've been pulled out of school. I don't regret that. When I put them back at school, I asked for an air purifier in the school. I asked that the windows be open. I asked that they use natural pesticide spray. I found a place that would accept sort of where we were at. A couple of my kids went to college and didn't ask for any accommodations. I just encouraged them, just go back in there. Go. You're not living in it. My focus became, what are we living in? And that is the focus of building biology, is particularly your sleeping area, and not to worry so much about everyday life. It's out there. We have to build back a tolerance. It's not going to just happen. It's going to come from within us. And part of that is that change in mindset, going from being threatened to challenged. And I just read a study this week on that very issue, how much better our brains operate, how much happier, how much more satisfaction there is when we are challenged versus threatened. And that switch is not easy to make, but I saw it as a challenge to get back out there. And I no longer lived in that fear.
So you've mentioned that your family went from the moldy environment to the new environment, then developed multiple chemical sensitivities. Now that you're even further out, did those chemical sensitivities that you were told would be permanent, did those also improve?
I don't know. Yes, absolutely, because I don't think about it. at all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think my kids do. They buy there was a big thing when they were teenagers about deodorant, and we were really over the top sick, and I was really over the top trying to get better. So I don't apologize. I was very, very cautious for a while. But gradually, as we just sort of let things in and just sort of stopped focusing on that and knowing that, if I get a headache, I'll recover. Okay. The less I became consumed with the whole idea of it and just sort of embraced the journey, whatever it is, I would say no one in our family really thinks much about this in going out. I walk down the laundry aisle because it's a shortcut. I'm not thinking about it. What's in that house?
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that probably even to some extent ties back into the reason that the breathing is so beneficial, because when you're not worried about it, you're not in that kind of fight or flight mode. You're not in sympathetic dominance, which is the opposite of parasympathetic dominance, which is where we heal and recover. And so I think it is really important. And one of the things I remember seeing in your book was your talk about the DNRS and the amygdala retraining. You mentioned the word limbic system a couple of times. Were those tools that you experienced at all?
I didn't learn about those until 4 or 5 years out. So by then I felt like we had sort of crossed over where I wasn't focused. I always recommend that to someone who's out. They've been doing everything right. They're still struggling. Why not try this? But I have no direct experience. To me, it makes complete sense to retrain the brain. There is so much hope in that field. We are learning so much. We don't have to just assume this is it. It can't get any better. I'll be in fight or flight the rest of my life. The world is out to get me. This is it, but it's not your fault that that's where you are, because that's where I was. I wasn't before my mold exposure. I was pretty oblivious to all of it. I was living fine. Now all of a sudden I can't tolerate any of it. And so I would look to those retraining. I would just be open to any sort of aspect of the brain can be retrained. And if I need someone to help me along that route, I'll take advantage of it.
I agree 100%. And it's interesting because unfortunately with those systems, a lot of times what people hear at first is, oh, you're telling me it's all in my head, which is not really what you're talking about. They haven't looked into it enough to realize that it's the science of neuroplasticity. And at one point, maybe your limbic system needed to respond that way to kind of say, hey, this is not going to work. You need to get out of here. And it kind of gets in that loop that maybe then when you're in a safer environment, it's still responding as if you're not. And we need to kind of reboot the computer, so to speak.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yes.
So one of the things that someone asked me to ask you in this conversation is about your interest in EMFs as well, that you're really known for mold and for water damaged buildings, but why did you get interested in EMFs? What drew you to that? And then was that also something that impacted your family? And then lastly, is there a connection between the EMFs and the mold?
Great question. So when I decided to get my certification in building biology, which is just a very cursory, it's very general overview. The overview was just phenomenal for me because I thought it would be a lot about mold and chemicals. I got to the part about electromagnetic fields and I thought, this is really overwhelming. I just had no interest in it. But because I'm going to make my way through this, I really want this certification. I studied it and my eyes were open. I feel like this is a huge missing link, not only the way we build our homes, but the way we are wiring them. 100 years ago, we did not surround ourselves with this type of non-ionizing radiation, and it is dismissed. It's non-ionizing. It's not an X-ray. It's not looking directly into the sun. This is just minor stuff. It's cumulative. But let's just say maybe it's foreign. We don't know the long-term implications. So my interest was sparked. I had someone come out that I found in my area to show me the hot spots in my home, who showed me the difference with a meter, the difference between Wi-Fi on and Wi-Fi off. That was it. That's all I needed to see. We're courting. Do I feel like this is a cure for us? No, I'm over by then. I'm over the cure thing. I don't care anymore. I just want to live with as much knowledge and health as I can. I saw that and I'm like, no, So we corded everything. Kids, grumble, grumble, grumble. But that was the first change we made. And then actually, you know what I recommend? If you believe that the electrical component could be impacting your health, one of the simplest first steps is just to turn off all your computers, your router, turn it off at night. And that was the first step. Then cording is the second step, or just having Wi-Fi on only when you need it. But beginning to look at this as a possibility of impacting my immune system, possibly putting it in fight or flight mode because it is a threat, causing some inflammation because when you're in fight or flight, you're going to there's an inflammatory response, so discomfort comes. So to me, this became fascinating. And again, rather than seeing it as a threat, which is always my first instinct, I become very anxious. I became very compulsive. I got to do something about this. And I worked my way through that. It's like coming down off the ledge. No, I'm not going to live like that. Even if we make no changes, it's okay. Once I got through that, I'm like, it's a challenge. What electricity do we need? So I find this science cutting edge, and I absolutely love it. I think it makes so much sense. And the good news about the EMF issue as opposed to the mold issue is that there's so many little things you can do that will make a big difference.
I also agree that it's a critical thing, and you're talking to someone who's slept in a Faraday cage for the last decade as a result of my work with Dr. Klinghardt. And when I was a patient of his many years ago, he required his patients to turn off the circuit breakers in their house when they went to bed every night. And I would go down with the flashlight to the circuit breaker outside and, turn it off. Fortunately, I don't need to do that anymore, but I've also had building biologists come out and say, this is how you can reduce the electromagnetic field exposure. And I think it's most critical when we're sleeping. And I'm surprised. I just talked to somebody recently that was charging their cell phone on their nightstand, plugged in every night. And I said, well, you certainly have it on airplane mode at that point, right? No, why would I put it on airplane mode? And I'm like, it's right next to your head, like all night long. Yeah. It just doesn't make sense. So yeah, I agree. It's a critical thing.
And the only way to see that is with a meter. See, I wouldn't have believed that. I would have said, I'm not proud of this about me, but I resist. It's like resisting my friend saying, could it be your house? I was very resistant. When I thought airplane mode, all this stuff, resist. When I saw it on a meter, and I have it on my blog for that reason. I got a meter and I did videos showing so that you can see, when you see it, there's a huge difference between airplane mode and off airplane mode. So why not? Absolutely. And I would even recommend not charging it near you because there are electrical fields and magnetic fields that come from something, magnetic fields that come from something plugged in, but that's much better to do it in airplane mode. That's a great first step. We are look at how we embraced our devices and this whole area. It was so fast. No one was talking about health. Well, there are amazing stories of pioneers who said this is not safe, mostly from the military studies of radar in the military, showing that this is not necessarily something we should take lightly. But we didn't listen because we just like it.
Yeah, absolutely. So on your website, you talk about the 10 things that you learned the hard way, and I thought they were really insightful. So I was wondering if you could share the 10 things you learned the hard way with people that are listening.
You have to prompt me because I don't remember them.
Okay. So, and I hope this is in the right order and not the reverse order, but the first thing you said was the answer might be right in front of you.
Again, this is all based on my terribly painful journey. We were looking to 60 people to tell us what is wrong with our family, and it was right there. And I'm not saying these are translated into sometimes sometimes something is in front of you. Maybe it's a relational problem, and we think, it comes down to if we pull back enough and we sit still long enough, it may be just something that comes to us. It's right there. It wasn't nearly as complicated as I was making or so out of possibility. So I'm trying to sort of rein this into life lessons.
Time is often the best medicine.
And I, again, felt so rushed when I got out of the house. And this will bring me to tears because I felt so much pressure, especially as a mother. And people on forums are like, you've got to get your kids on this, and your kids, you can cure your child of this. And this is not even my own journey, because I didn't have time for the first few years to even think about my health. It was just trying to get them. And I see it's been 9 years. If I could have just relaxed and sort of let the fresh air, let the good, just simple, I was missing my kids as they were. I was so focused on the urgency of getting better that I couldn't enjoy the moment. And so, yes, that's absolutely something I believe heartily.
Speak kindly to yourself.
It is very hard. I think it's one of the biggest symptoms of some sort of toxic exposure are the negative voices. They really do overtake you. This is a symptom. It is part of our human nature as well. I'm not negating that. When you're dealing with some sort of health issue that might be environmental in nature, the negative voices, and I encourage people to see that for what it is. Even learning that was a symptom was very helpful to me. Okay, this is not necessarily, but I couldn't even see that the negative voices were just like, you're never gonna, this is terrible, this is the doom, this is awful, and you're not gonna, and just very, very harsh, very, very harsh voices. You've got to do better. You're not doing enough. You're just seeing that was, and so, and even if, and I still will tend to go that way. When I have a health flare, it's there. It tends to be, I don't really feel a lot of symptoms anymore health-wise, but I will get flares with this issue. And just seeing that and saying, so what can I say to myself that is a little nicer, just a little gentler, a little kinder than what I'm saying. But it's so hard to see it and wade through that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. This one I think we touched on a couple of times throughout the show, but the air we breathe matters.
Just not dismissing that fact, and it is dismissed. Now we get it with chemical plants in the neighborhood. We're very contradictory about this in our nation. On the one hand, we get it that something in the air is toxic, petrochemicals in our air and all this, but we don't get it in our own living space. And it's just very important to know it matters. That's not fixing, that's not answering every question about it, just knowing it's important.
It's better to know than not know.
And I have felt this struggle many times. I wish I could go back to the bliss of not knowing any of this. I don't like knowing what I know, because sometimes the knowledge leads us to be threatened and puts us into fight or flight mode. That's important to work through that. You're still better off knowing. Had I known what I know now, we would never have moved in there, and life would be very different. I'd rather know this than not know.
Relinquishment is a balm for the soul.
I even put that in a different phrase recently. It came to me when I was driving. For me, recovery is more about relinquishment than restoration. One of the things I hear most often is, I just want my life back. Did you get your life back? Did you get your life back? I stopped thinking about that. I let it go. And so I have found this is probably the number one, when we even go back to treatments that we were talking about, I would rank this number one. Learn to let go. And it's more, sometimes it's a simple thing and it's the hardest. Sort of relaxing and relinquishing a lot of the control of how this life goes. And when you've had a huge, huge trauma or you have a health crisis, it is very hard to let go of control.
And we're going to talk more about that because you just posted a new blog today about letting go. So that was perfect. So the next one was symptoms will instruct if we listen.
And we like to think about our medical community, I mean, conventionally, and there are those who understand differently, but conventionally, it's just you have a symptom, you make it go away. And that's how I operated for the first 15 years of parenting. It's just like, oh, you're sick, let's go to the doctor and we'll make it go away. And there's nothing wrong with alleviating symptoms. But the last thing I was asking was, what And I wasn't asking this in that first year after our major exposure. What are these symptoms? What is all this sickness saying? Never ask the question. And sometimes those are our teachers.
Sometimes you're the expert.
And I go back to what we talked about so many times here. You've got to know this. Whether you're in a doctor's office, a naturopath's office, you're talking to a mold remediator, you're talking, sometimes, in fact, you are the expert when it comes to your health. Ultimately, trust your gut. That it will change. It doesn't mean that you're not open. I still like hearing from my acupuncturist some of the fascinating things about Chinese medicine or what he sees going on with my pulse and all. I'm interested in that. But when it comes down to it, I'm going to leave, and I'm living with myself most of the time. I can trust my gut about what it is I need. What do I need? Even now I live that way, let alone back then when I put my kids' health in the hands of experts and never thought about my gut.
Allow hindsight to move you forward.
This is a painful one because hindsight can be very painful. And I had a choice the day we left. I could say, I wish we would have never bought that house. I wish we would have seen this sooner. I wish, and because it was so clear. When I got it, I got it. And that's why it was so easy for me to leave. Oh, I got it. Let's get out. That could torture me to this day. Instead, I want to use it to help me move forward. And there is always forward. It doesn't matter where you are. You could be in it all right now. There's still a forward. You don't have to live in the past. Why didn't I see this? Why is it this way? Why could it have been different? All of this, the hindsight can actually propel you. And that's what it did to leave the house. When I got it, it moved me out. It moved me forward. And I find that happening over and over again as the more I learn, because it's a constant learning.
Absolutely.
Whether it's health, it's life, we're always learning. And the hindsight is always 20/20. But that's hindsight. Let it propel you forward.
And I love all of these, but I particularly like this next one because I think these conditions can become so overwhelming. And so the number 10 on your list is the next step is enough.
And that's why I called it takes time, sort of this understanding of time. But when it comes at you, and especially if you have, it doesn't matter, whatever your life circumstance, when you jump ahead, it becomes overwhelming. Generally, if we accept that we can't do it all now, and we sit sort of still in our own self, breathe, and think through what our gut is telling us, we generally have an idea of, well, I could do this next. Just do that. And you know what? That's enough. You can't take 10 steps at once. You can't. You can only take the next step. So to clutter all of that with saying, but I need to do this and this and this, and this is the problem with mold, is like, well, I must need to leave everything and abandon my whole life, and we're going to have to move to a dry climate. We're going to have to do this. It's like, no, what is your next step? Maybe it's getting a dust sample of your house. That's enough. You don't have to do anything but that if that's your next step.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the overwhelm can actually paralyze people from taking the next step.
Exactly.
So I think it's really critical. You posted a new blog today, and I don't want to necessarily go into each one of these because I think people can go and read it, but I found it interesting that you said one particular one I wanted to touch on. You say we need to let go of normal, of justice, of healing, of people understanding, of the dreaded gene, and of getting your life back. And I'm curious what you mean by letting go of the dreaded gene.
And those who are keyed into this, Scott, through your website, probably, there is a lab test that tells us whether or not our bodies will detoxify some of these exposures well. It's a fact. And sure enough, I had the double of that. So all of my kids have that quote unquote dreaded gene. At first, that was one of the most validating tests I got. I felt like, okay, I'm not crazy here. No wonder we are so sick. That soon became something very paralyzing and again put me into this threatened mode. Oh no, there's no hope for my kids. They'll never be able to detox this. They can't live in the world. It became something that burdened me so much that finally, well, what I did was I just read about epigenetics because I found that comforting, that whole field of understanding that our lifestyle choices can have more impact than our DNA. And there is actually, through deep breathing, can impact our DNA. I mean, there's all sorts of neuroplasticity. All of this can actually sort of outweigh. And I found that very empowering. But in order to really embrace that, I just felt like I got to let that go. So what? We have bad genes. Okay, I'm not going to change that. So I can either feel really bad about that and feel really at risk throughout my life, or I can just let it go. And I let it go. I really did.
Yeah, and I won't even use that term, but I have one of those as well, and I'm doing incredibly well and have recovered my health to a very, very good place today relative to where I was many years ago. And so I think that is an important message, that our genes do not mandate or dictate our outcome. It's really important for people to know that, because I think people can feel hopelessness when they see some of these genes that maybe they have, and yet many of us that have them are doing very well today, yourself included. So tell us a little bit as we kind of wrap up here, how is your family doing today?
Well, I would say we're not thinking about mold. In fact, every year we would sort of celebrate or whatever with the day we left the house. It was October 4th, 2008. This year, this October went by and I forgot. So I forgot that, it's been 9 years. I just wasn't even thinking. And so many of my kids said, you know what, Mom, I didn't even think about that. It was October 4th, wasn't it? So I think that says a lot. I feel like all of us in our family limp a bit. And I kind of feel like, most of the world is sort of limping. I'm okay with that. I wouldn't say, it's as if it never happened. I don't see any long-term implications for my kids. I feel like they're just, and of course, many of them are now in adulthood, and each one of them has a phenomenal story of deep suffering. Like, my kids were sick. And so to see them function like they do, but I wouldn't say, we found it, we're cured. It's I just, like you said, we're just immensely better, and we're immensely better. We're not where we were, and I'm just so grateful. I'm just grateful to have today, and that's as far as I get. That's all I know.
Very cool. So tell us a little bit about your blog for those that want to learn more. I think you write so well. So tell us about the blog, tell us about the book. And then I think I want to hear just a little bit about, it sounds like you have a company as well called Just So. So how does all that fit in?
Well, I actually have just cut back so much of my writing, but now what I'm writing is so deep within me. I'm really enjoying it. I'm no longer trying to change the world or educate the world. I'm really focused on my breathing, my yoga, and my gym. I go to the gym 5 days a week, and I'm really enjoying that, really focused on improving my weights and all that. So that's really where my focus is, and making sure that there's a lot of yoga in there, just a lot of breathing. Slowing down. So it looks and sounds like maybe I do more than I do, but I do really enjoy writing. And so I did start the blog called It Takes Time. And at first it was called Mold Recovery, because that was my focus. And I realized, no, that's not really our focus after a certain amount of years. It's just sort of just helping people understand just time sometimes is your best medicine, and just giving things time, taking that next step and not worrying about all of that. And then I started making soap for my family that was chemical free. I just love making soap. It's a creative outlet. So I started a little online business with that. And then Moms Aware is something else that I have a team of people helping me sort of create awareness about the impact of the environment. So that's it.
And people can find your book on Amazon.com. So I definitely recommend people check that out. I'll put a link to it in the show notes as well. So I'm going to wrap up with, what are some of the key things, and you've mentioned several of these, but I ask this question to everyone. So what are some of the key things that you do on a daily basis now to continue to support your own health?
Mostly it's staying in tune, very aware, very intentional about slowing down, and not striving and working so hard at life, I don't focus on one supplement anymore. I'm not even thinking about how I'm managing my health. I'm thinking mostly about my emotional well-being, because that, as I said, is what will flare. And so I have to stay very connected with that. And so I would say it's as simple as that. And breathing is something you can practice for a lifetime. And there's so much help there on the internet. I love the meditation podcast. I love the book Full Catastrophe Living, which I mentioned in that 10 things of letting go. I feel like there's a lot of support to help us in this area. And this is where we can use technology to our benefit. That, we have people who are equally intent on making this a daily part of their life. So I'm very, very focused on that.
This has been super, super fun for me. It's obvious you're a fellow journey person,
yes,
and a lot of the things that you found helpful, I've also found helpful. But I also agree with your message that your journey and my journey is different from someone else's journey. I think the work that you're doing to put information out through your blog is fantastic. The information is great. Again, you write so well. Your book is very helpful as a resource for people that are going through issues with water damage. And so I just want to thank you, honor you for the work you're doing to really educate people and to take your experience beyond just helping yourself and your family, but to really affect change in the broader community and the world. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much.
To learn more about today's guest, visit momsaware.org. That's momsaware.org, or ittakestime.com. That's it-takes-time.com. You can also learn about Just So products at justso.co. That's justso.co. I appreciate your support of the Better Health Guy blogcast series. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter as Better Health Guy. The show can be found on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. If you'd like to support the show, please visit betterhealthguy.com/donate. And if you'd like to be added to my newsletter, please visit betterhealthguy.com/newsletters. I'm looking forward to many more shows ahead and appreciate your interest.
Thanks for listening to this Better Health Guy blogcast with Scott, your Better Health Guy. To check out additional shows and learn more about Scott's personal journey to better health, please visit betterhealthguy.com.